Hi, I'm Alec Ross, and I serve as Hillary Clinton's Senior Advisor for Innovation at the State Department in Washington, D.C. In this role, it's my job to maximize the potential of technology and social media in service of America's diplomatic and development goals. I'm really excited to be able to visit with you virtually today at the Net Democracy event in Israel. I'm incredibly impressed by the work that you are seeking to do to expand democratic opportunities and education via internet technologies. I think we're very early in the history of the internet as a tool that can be used to enhance governance. And I'm very pleased at convenings like the one that you are attending right now to figure out how, in a world where these tools and where these technologies are becoming so powerful, how they can be harnessed for good. In my own personal life, I've seen the sweep of this power over the past 12 years. 12 years ago, I started an NGO in the basement of a dirty office building with a vision for trying to figure out how we could use the internet to help people who were poor become economically self-sufficient and politically empowered. Over the following 8 years, me and my buddies in that basement grew that organization, One Economy, into a very large global enterprise with programs on 4 continents and 15 countries. And what that showed me was that the internet is something that can be used to very powerful and important effect for people who are historically not empowered. I saw its power next in Barack Obama's presidential campaign. As I hope all of you in Israel heard, on the Obama campaign, we made very effective use of technology and of social media specifically as a way of connecting people who were historically disconnected from the political process, and used this as a way of drawing people in and allowing them to participate even if there wasn't a campaign office. Once Barack Obama became president and Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State, each of them sought to continue to put America's leadership in technology and in the internet space specifically to work. Not just in the United States for the purposes of things like education and job creation, but also in our foreign policy. And so one of the things that Hillary Clinton has put in place, and she did it at the very beginning of her tenure as Secretary of State, is something she calls 21st century statecraft. And what 21st century statecraft basically does is it adapts traditional practices of diplomacy to account for our living in a world of increasingly ubiquitous and increasingly powerful information networks. What does that mean as a practical matter? Well, what it means as a practical matter, I'll give 2 quick examples. Number one, after the earthquake in Haiti, which saw more than 200,000 people die and which saw that country devastated, we put a program in place where, leveraging a nearly universal technology, SMS, text messaging, we allowed the American people, if they sent a text message with the word Haiti in it to a specific short code, $10 would be added to their phone bill, and all $10 would go for earthquake relief. You might, at first we thought this was a pretty good idea, and we thought we might raise a couple $100,000. But because of social media, and because of our sophistication about understanding how influence is exercised through social media, we built a campaign which in a little over 2 weeks raised more than $30 million. We're also, within 21st century statecraft, figuring out ways to apply new technologies to solve old problems. So, for example, we have a real struggle in northern Mexico with these very, very violent border cities. And one of the things that we are doing now is using our sophistication and using our willingness to innovate and figure out programs to combat the drug cartels in northern Mexico using these tools. And another example is just simply with communication. You know, historically, diplomacy is conducted in rooms like the one that I'm sitting in right now, with a mahogany table to my side and a flag flying in the background. Diplomacy historically is conducted government to government by men in suits and ties talking to other men with suits and ties. And one of the things that 21st century statecraft has unleashed is, yes, we will continue to conduct diplomacy in the manner in which we've done it historically for hundreds of years, since Benjamin Franklin was America's first diplomat in the 18th century. But one of the things that we are now seeking to do is engage with people, with populations writ large, so that it's not all government leader to government leader. An example of this, I'll just give you one quick example, was after the revolution in Egypt when Mubarak was overthrown. By listening through social media, and that's important, listening, not just talking. Remember, you only have one mouth, but you have two ears, I tell our ambassadors when they first start using social media. We learned that Egyptian youth had lots of problems with the United States. They were angry about 30 years of support for Mubarak, and they had lots of questions about the role that we played in their revolution. So when she heard this, one of the things that Hillary Clinton said she wanted to do was be able to connect and engage directly with Egyptian youth, and frankly those who don't like us very much. Now, 10 years ago, what we would have done is the embassy would have spent a lot of time identifying very polite, nice young people who we could have vetted, who would have come and sat at a table in a conference room and had a cup of tea, and with whom the Secretary of State and other embassy officials could have had a very nice, and polite conversation. We would have taken pictures and we would have issued a press release. And next day, things would have gone on more likely than not the same way that they were in the days prior. But because of social media, one of the things we were able to do is connect and engage with young people who, you know, both by virtue of their numbers and by virtue of where they live, it would have been really hard for them to come to the embassy. So what we did is we set up a partnership with an Egyptian social media company called Masrawi.com. We gave this Masrawi.com total control. We said, you have half an hour live with Hillary Clinton. We do not want to see the questions ahead of time. Feel free to ask the very toughest questions you can. The one requirement we have is that we want it to come from Egyptian youth. And so Hillary Clinton took questions from people who, let's be honest, they would never have sat at that conference table in the U.S. Embassy, sitting 3 feet away from Hillary Clinton, asking her questions face to face. But because of social media and because of our willingness to give up a measure of control, we were able to engage with these young people in a way that was authentic, in a way that was real, and people knew it and they trusted it, and that had a far greater impact than, you know, bringing in half a dozen young people, snapping some photos, and having a cup of tea would have had. So I think that by connecting people who are at the very top of government with people who they otherwise would not have necessarily listened to or spoken to, I think that this is a very positive potential of social media. But I stress potential because we've got to get all of our leaders to understand and accept these new forms of media. And they need to understand that the 21st century is a lousy time to be a control freak. If you want to exert power, if you want to be influential, if you want to be relevant, you've got to be comfortable giving up a measure of this power. Up a measure of this control, and engaging in these networked spaces where citizens have power of processing and power of distribution, the likes of which they didn't have previously. So let me thank you again. I'm delighted to have been able to speak to you very briefly at this event. I think that thinking about how democratic values and education can be leveraged by internet technologies is just about the most important conversation anybody can be happening right now. And I think the fact that it's happening in Israel is a very good and a very important thing. We need to figure out how these technologies, which have been disruptive for both good and ill, can be put to positive work, to productive work, politically and in terms of creating more connectedness in society in Israel and beyond. Again, I'm Alec Ross from Hillary Clinton's office at the State Department. Thank you.